Okay, I want you to imagine that you are a camel. You got that? Okay, great. Now, we are going to have a quick look at the Christmas story, but focusing on the part where those chaps come to visit Jesus from a long way off, and they bring him some special gifts. Okay? And to help and go along with this, you will need this doodle sheet. Okay, so hopefully you should have one of these, and you'll need that as you go along. Okay? Great. We read this story in the Bible. The Bible is split up into books, and this story comes from the book of Matthew. And the books are split up into chapters, and this is from chapter 2 of the book of Matthew. And if you look at your piece of paper in front of you, you should see that you have got this passage of the Bible written down, and you'll see some small numbers. And those small numbers indicate the verses, sometimes at the beginning of a sentence or just a section. So the Bible split up into books, and then chapters, and then verses. Now, let's get a few things sorted. This story is traditionally known as or called the story of the three kings. But let's have a closer look. First of all, look at verse 1. Can you see the word kings written there anywhere? Now, yes, it does say that Herod was a king. And if you look onto verse 2, you'll see that they were looking for a king, but the men themselves were not called kings, they were called wise men. Can you find and underline where it says wise men? It also says that there were some, not 3 of them. So why do we assume that there were 3? Well, it might be because of the famous Christmas carol that says, "We 3 kings of Orient are." Or maybe if you look down all the way to verse 11, you'll see that they brought 3 gifts. And so maybe there was an assumption that 1 gift was brought by 1 man. And so there were 3 gifts and therefore 3 men. But it doesn't tell us that there were 3 men. It only says that there were some men and that these were wise men who brought the gifts. Secondly, let's see where these wise men found Jesus. Look again at verse 11. They came to the... what does it say? House. Not a stable. In fact, stable never gets mentioned anywhere in the Christmas story in the Bible. But the Bible does use the word manger at one point, that Mary and Joseph laid Jesus in a manger, which is an animal's feeding trough. And so because there was animals involved, that's why some people assume there must have been a stable. But there's no guarantee of that. It's possible that Jesus was simply born in the back street behind this house or wherever they ended up moving into by the time the wise men got there. Right, so in a moment we are going to make a comic page. But before we do that, let's read the whole story so that we know what it's all about.
Okay, I'm going to read it, but I'm going to pause occasionally. When you hear this noise, I would like you to say what the next word will be. Then we can check we're all in the same place. Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea during the time when Herod was king. When Jesus was born, some wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the baby who was born to be the King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, as were all the people in Jerusalem. Herod called a meeting of all the leading priests and teachers of the law and asked them where the Christ would be born. They answered, "In the town of Bethlehem in Judea. The prophet wrote about this in the scriptures. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not just an insignificant village in Judah. A ruler will come from you who will be like a shepherd for my people Israel. Micah chapter 5 verse 2. Then Herod had a secret meeting with the wise men and learned from them the exact time when he first saw the star. He sent the wise men to Bethlehem, saying, "Look carefully for the child. When you find him, come, tell me, so I can worship him too." After the wise men heard the king, they left. The star they had seen in the east went before them until it stopped above the place where the child was. When the wise men saw the star, they were filled with joy. They came to the house where the child was and saw him with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. They opened their gifts and gave him treasures of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But God warned the wise men in a dream not to go back to Herod, so they returned to their own country by a different way.
Right, back to being a camel. You will see on your piece of paper a speech bubble next to your camel. He or she, and you can give them a name as well, that's a good idea, whatever you think, is in the desert with the wise men following a star. So what is your camel saying? Are they excited, confused, fed up maybe? What do you think? This journey that they're on is going to end up being between 400 to 700 miles, depending where the east was that they were coming from. And that would be like us travelling from the north of England all the way down to the south of England, or even across the sea and into France and beyond. It's a very long way and would literally take months or maybe even years, especially when you consider that they were following a star, which presumably means they could only really travel at night time. Okay, pause the video now and write down in that speech bubble what you think the camel is saying. Now there is a think bubble next to the camel. The wise men pop into the palace in Jerusalem to see King Herod, and King Herod is particularly troubled by their news. Could your think bubble show how the camel is perhaps worried by King Herod's motives for seeing the baby Jesus? King Herod realises that this is God's promised rescuer. Now, what does King Herod ask the teachers and the priests about in verse 4? Have a look. Can you underline the title that Herod gives to this baby? So Herod, it seems, realises that this baby is the Christ, and Christ means the chosen or anointed one. So after their mistake at the palace, the wise men realise that they are only a few miles away from their destination. If you pop Jerusalem and Bethlehem into Google Maps, you'll find that they're only about an hour and 46 minutes away on foot. So they were really close. How did they feel when they saw the star again? Have a look at verse 10. These wise men were on a mission to find this child. And they did. And did you notice there it said child, not baby? So Jesus was obviously a little bit older than a baby, although the word child could still mean toddler or little one. Anyway, I want you to underline the words filled with joy in verse 10. Now, the Bible, this section of the Bible in the New Testament, was originally written in Greek, and it has since been translated into hundreds of languages all over the world and into English many times, because languages changed and developed over the years as well. And so this phrase has been translated in different ways, and here are some of the ways that it has been translated over time from the original Greek 2,000 years ago. Rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, thrilled and excited, overwhelmed with joy. Basically, they were very happy. And they brought 3 gifts with them. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us why they chose those three gifts, but we do know some things about them and how they might have been used. Frankincense. This was an expensive gift. You might have heard the word incense, something used in some churches and that is still used as part of worship sometimes. And frankincense is basically a perfume, but probably not a liquid in a bottle, but more of a resin. Gold, well, we know about that. It was very expensive and still is. It's solid and heavy and would perhaps be a fitting tribute for a child that they believed was going to be the king of God's people. Myrrh. This was a stranger gift perhaps. It was another resin and also something used as a perfume, perhaps also as a medicine, and particularly for embalming a dead body. In fact, Jesus is offered myrrh when he is on the cross, and the men who put his body in the tomb wrapped his body and used myrrh as well. The Bible goes on to talk about Mary, Jesus' friend, who brought spices to the tomb 3 days later, but found that Jesus had risen from the dead. So it turns out that Jesus' body didn't really need embalming after all, because it wasn't going to be in the tomb for very long. So perhaps these gifts weren't only expensive, but also had lots of meaning for Jesus' life as well. Right, on to your comic. Make sure you pop your name into the explosion box in the top corner, so we know it's yours. And then give your camel a voice. What does he think about this plan to travel 400 to 700 miles? Does he realise it's that far? What's he thinking? What does he say? How does the camel feel about the mistake that they made popping into the palace in Jerusalem? As the wise men see the star again, pop something into the box to explain why Bethlehem was so important. In the box next to the map, you can mention the 5 miles they had left to travel from Jerusalem to Bethlehem in order to reach their destination and find Jesus. There are 3 labels for the 3 gifts. Can you remember what they're called? And can you remember something about the meaning that each one might have and the significance it might have for Jesus' life? Finally, the think bubble next to the wise men lets you write down what they might be thinking, rather than just the camel, about all of the events of this story. And the box next to them gives you a chance to write down why this story of Christmas is important to Christians.